My name is Dr. Elena Marsh. I'm a fine art conservator specializing in Renaissance and Baroque paintings, and for the past 18 years, I've worked with some of the most prestigious museums along the East Coast. I've restored works by Caravaggio, Rembrandt, and Titian. I've spent countless nights alone in climate-controlled restoration labs, my hands steady under magnification lamps, breathing life back into centuries-old masterpieces. What I'm about to tell you happened 6 months ago at the Aldrich Museum of Colonial Art in Providence, Rhode Island, and it's the reason I can no longer work after sunset. If you're from New England and you've ever visited a museum late at night, you need to hear this. It could save your life. Before I continue, hit that subscribe button if you're interested in true accounts of the unexplainable, and drop a comment if you've ever felt watched by a painting in a museum. I'm not talking about those optical illusions where the eyes seem to follow you. I'm talking about something else entirely. Now, let me tell you about the painting that ended my career. It arrived at the Aldrich on a Tuesday in late March. I remember because the forsythia were just starting to bloom outside my studio window, their yellow branches bright against the gray New England sky. The painting came from the estate of a deceased collector in Newport, a man named Harrison Vail, who died alone in his mansion overlooking the Atlantic. The estate lawyer told our director that Vail had kept the painting in a locked room for 40 years, never showing it to anyone, never speaking of it. The work itself was remarkable. An oil portrait, approximately 36 by 48 inches, depicting a young woman in 17th century dress. She stood in what appeared to be a candlelit room, her face turned slightly toward the viewer, her expression unreadable. The painter's technique was masterful. The way the candlelight played across her features, the luminous quality of her skin, the deep shadows pooling in the corners of the composition. The paint had darkened with age, and layers of yellowed varnish obscured much of the detail. But even through the grime, I could see this was exceptional work. There was no signature, no date. The stretcher bars looked original, hand-hewn oak that suggested late 1600s, possibly earlier. The canvas itself was linen, the weave consistent with Dutch or Flemish manufacture from that period. Whoever had painted this woman had been a master, possibly trained in the Utrecht school or influenced by Caravaggio's tenebrism. My job was to clean it, stabilize any flaking paint, and prepare it for exhibition in the museum's upcoming show on colonial portraiture. Standard restoration work. I estimated 3 weeks, maybe 4 if I found damage beneath the surface grime. I should have known something was wrong from the beginning. The painting felt wrong. Not visibly. Everything about the technical execution was correct, brilliant even. But when I first touched the canvas to examine the surface, my fingers went cold. Not cool, cold, like I'd pressed them against a window in winter. The restoration studio was kept at a constant 70 degrees, but that canvas felt like it had been stored in a freezer. I mentioned it to James, my assistant, a graduate student from RISD who helped with documentation and preliminary work. He touched it and frowned. "It's the same temperature as everything else," he said. But it wasn't. I know what I felt. I began the initial examination on Wednesday morning. This is standard procedure. Before any cleaning or intervention, we document everything. I photographed the painting under normal light, then under raking light that shows surface texture, then under ultraviolet light that reveals old repairs and overpaint. I took infrared photographs to see through the upper paint layers to any underdrawing beneath. That's when I noticed the first anomaly. Under UV light, most old varnish fluoresces a yellowish green. Areas of restoration or modern overpaint appear dark purple or black. It's how we map previous interventions. But this painting showed something I'd never seen before. The woman's eyes, just her eyes, showed no fluorescence at all. They appeared as 2 black voids in her face, as if those sections of paint absorbed the ultraviolet light completely. I made a note in my documentation log. Unusual pigment composition in eye area, possibly later restoration. But I didn't believe that. The paint surface was continuous, no visible breaks or texture changes. Whatever those eyes were made of, it had been there from the beginning. I started the cleaning tests Thursday afternoon. Conservation is slow work. You don't just slather solvent on a painting and wipe. You test different cleaning solutions on tiny areas, usually hidden spots along the edges, to find what removes dirt and varnish without damaging the original paint. I mixed solutions, applied them with cotton swabs to areas no bigger than a pencil eraser, documented the results. The varnish came off easily, too easily. 300 years of accumulated grime should be stubborn, but this dissolved with minimal solvent, as if it wanted to be removed. Beneath the yellowed surface, colors emerged with startling vibrancy. The woman's dress was deep crimson, not the muddy brown I'd expected. The background wasn't black, but a rich Prussian blue. And her skin had an almost luminescent quality, as if lit from within. By Friday, I'd completed the cleaning tests and was ready to begin the full restoration. I decided to work late. The museum closed at 6, and I preferred working in the evening when there were no interruptions, no footsteps in the hallway, no voices drifting up from the galleries below. Just me, the painting, and the steady hum of the ventilation system. I began cleaning the upper right quadrant at 7:30 p.m. This is the standard approach. Start in one corner, work systematically across the surface. Under my magnification lamp, I could see individual brushstrokes, the artist's technique revealing itself as decades of grime dissolved. The work was mesmerizing. The painter had built up the flesh tones in translucent layers, each glaze contributing to the final effect. It was the technique of a master. I worked for 2 hours without looking up. When I finally leaned back to rest my eyes, I glanced at the woman's face. Her expression had changed. I'm not talking about the effect you get when cleaning reveals details that were hidden. I mean, the actual expression on her face was different from what I documented 3 days earlier. In my photographs, her mouth had been neutral, almost serene. Now, the corners of her lips were turned up slightly. She was smiling. I pulled out my documentation photos to compare, and that's when I realized the smile wasn't the only thing that had changed. I sat at my work table at 9:40 p.m., documentation photographs spread in front of me, my hands shaking slightly as I held my magnifying loupe. The painting stood on its easel 6 feet away, the woman in the portrait watching me with that new, slight smile. In Wednesday's photos, taken just 2 days earlier, her gaze had been directed at a point somewhere over the viewer's left shoulder. Standard portraiture composition. But now, she was looking directly forward, directly at where I sat. I'm a scientist. My entire career is built on empirical observation, on documentation and proof. I checked my camera metadata, verified the file dates, examined the images at maximum resolution. There was no mistake. The painting had changed. I should have left. That's what I tell myself now. I should have walked out of that studio, locked the door, and never gone back. But 18 years of training, 18 years of rational thought, wouldn't let me accept what my eyes were telling me. There had to be an explanation. A trick of the lighting. Confirmation bias. Something. I approached the painting and examined the surface under magnification. The paint was old, centuries old. The craquelure patterns were authentic, the aging consistent throughout. This wasn't some modern forgery with artificially induced cracking. And yet, the expression was different. Undeniably different. I took new photographs from the exact same angles as my documentation shots. Then I stepped back and called James. He answered on the fourth ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Dr. Marsh, it's almost 10. "I need you to look at something," I said. "I'm sending you files. 2 sets of photographs of the veil painting. Tell me what you see." I heard rustling, then the ping of his laptop opening. A long silence. "The angle is different," he said finally. "In the second set, the camera is more centered." The camera position was locked on a tripod. Same position for all documentation shots. Another pause. "Then, I don't know. The lighting?" "Same lighting rig. Same settings." "Dr. Marsh, what are you saying?" I looked at the painting. The woman looked back, that subtle smile on her lips. "Never mind," I said. "Sorry to wake you. I'll see you Monday." I hung up before he could respond. If you're from Providence, maybe you've heard stories about the Aldrich Museum. The building itself dates to 1803, originally a merchant's mansion before it was converted to a museum in 1921. Hit subscribe if you know the building I'm talking about. There are rumors about that place, whispers about objects in the collection that behave strangely. But these are museums, old buildings filled with old things. Every institution has its ghost stories. I didn't believe in ghosts. I cleaned the painting for another hour, working on the upper portion, revealing more of that mysterious background. The blue wasn't uniform. There were architectural suggestions, the hint of a doorway or window frame, shapes that seemed to recede into impossible depth. The more I cleaned, the more I had the unsettling sense that I wasn't looking at a painted background at all, but through a window into an actual room. At 11:15, I stopped for the night. I photographed the painting again, full documentation, every angle, then covered it with acid-free paper and turned off my work lamps. The studio has no windows. When I switched off the overhead lights, the darkness was complete. I was halfway to the door when I heard it. A soft sound, fabric rustling. I froze, my hand on the light switch. The sound came again. The whisper of cloth moving, like someone shifting position in the dark. I turned on the lights. The studio was empty. Just my work table, my equipment, and the covered painting on its easel. I stood there for a full minute, listening to my own breathing, before I left and locked the door behind me. Saturday and Sunday I spent at home, but I couldn't stop thinking about the painting. I researched the Vail family, looking for information about Harrison Vail and his collection. What I found was sparse. He'd been a reclusive millionaire, old money from the shipping industry, never married. He'd lived alone in his Newport mansion for over 40 years after his parents died. No children, no close relations. When he died last December, a heart attack according to the obituary, the estate had gone to distant cousins who wanted nothing to do with his collection. The mansion itself had a history. Built in 1789 by a merchant named Josiah Aldrich, no relation to the museum family, who'd made his fortune in the triangle trade. He'd lived there with his wife and daughter until 1791, when the daughter, Mercy Aldrich, disappeared. The official record said she'd run away, but there were darker rumors. Servants reported hearing screams from the attic. A local minister had been called to perform a blessing on the house. And Josiah himself had become obsessed with commissioning paintings, dozens of them, all portraits of young women. I found a reference in the Rhode Island Historical Society archives to a 1792 letter written by Josiah's wife to her sister. He keeps them locked away where no one may see. He says they are his penance, but I know better. He believes he can keep her through the paint. On Monday, I arrived at the museum at 8 a.m. James was already in the studio, preparing materials for the day's work. "Dr. Marsh," he said when I entered, "about Friday night." "It's fine," I interrupted. I was overtired, seeing things that weren't there. But I pulled out my documentation photos and compared them to the painting. The smile was wider. Not much, maybe a few millimeters, but her lips were definitely turned up more than they had been Friday night. And her eyes, those strange UV-absorbing eyes, seemed brighter, more alive. James saw my expression. "What's wrong?" "Come here," I said. "Look at these photos. Wednesday's documentation versus now. Tell me what you see." He studied the images for a long moment, then looked at the painting, then back at the photos. "That's not possible," he whispered. "I know. Paintings don't change, Dr. Marsh. Paint dries. It becomes inert. It's chemistry." "I know." We stood there in silence. "What do we do?" he asked finally. I looked at the painting. The woman gazed back, that knowing smile on her lips, as if she were enjoying a private joke. "We document everything," I said. "We photograph it every hour. We set up a camera on time-lapse. We find out what's happening." "Maybe we should tell Director Morrison." "And say what? That we have a painting that changes expressions? He'll think we've lost our minds." James nodded slowly. "So we gather proof first." We gather proof first. That was our first mistake. We should have told someone. We should have refused to work on it. But we were scientists, and scientists need evidence. By Tuesday evening, she wasn't just smiling anymore. Her hand had moved. We set up a DSLR camera on a tripod, positioned to capture the full painting, programmed to take a photograph every 15 minutes. The camera had a date and timestamp overlay. Irrefutable evidence. James also installed a motion sensor camera in the corner of the studio, the kind used for wildlife observation, in case someone was tampering with the painting when we weren't there. Monday, I worked on the painting for 6 hours, cleaning the lower right quadrant. James documented everything, taking measurements, making notes. Every hour, we compared the current state to our growing archive of photographs. By 5 p.m., the changes were undeniable. In Monday's 8 a.m. photograph, the woman's right hand had been resting at her side, barely visible in the shadows of her dress. By 5 p.m., her hand was raised, positioned near her chest, fingers slightly curved as if reaching for something. "It's moving upward," James said, his voice tight. "Like she's gesturing." I examined the paint surface under magnification. The brush strokes were old. The cracking patterns flowed naturally across the areas that had changed. This wasn't fresh paint. This wasn't someone sneaking in and altering the work. The painting was changing itself. Tuesday, Director Morrison stopped by the studio during his afternoon rounds. He was a round man in his 60s, enthusiastic about the upcoming exhibition. "How's our mystery woman coming along?" he asked, peering at the painting. "Remarkable work, isn't it? We're thinking of making her the centerpiece of the Colonial show." "It's certainly unique," I said carefully. "Have you had any luck identifying the artist?" "Not yet. The technique suggests Dutch influence, possibly someone trained in Utrecht. But without a signature or provenance beyond the Vale estate," Morrison nodded. "Keep at it. I have a good feeling about this piece. It's going to draw considerable attention." After he left, James looked at me. "We should have told him." "And said what?" He looked right at it and didn't notice anything wrong.
"Maybe because he didn't see it before," We have comparison photos. He doesn't.
That was true. To someone seeing the painting for the first time, there was nothing obviously wrong. It was just a portrait of a woman, beautifully executed. Only we could see what it was becoming. Tuesday night, I stayed late again. James offered to remain with me, but I sent him home. This is what I told myself. I needed to work without distraction. But the truth is, I was fascinated. Despite my growing fear, I couldn't look away from what was happening. I worked until 10 p.m., cleaning the lower portion of the canvas. More of that impossible architectural background emerged. Suggestions of a doorway, a window, the corner of a table. And with each layer of varnish I removed, the paint beneath seemed to grow more vivid, more present. At 10:15, I heard the sound again. Fabric rustling. This time, I didn't turn on all the lights. I stood in the dimness of my work lamp and listened. The sound came from the painting's direction. Slowly, I approached it. The woman in the portrait watched me come closer. Her smile was pronounced now, unmistakable. Her raised hand was positioned as if she were beckoning. And as I stood there, 6 feet away, I saw her fingers move. Not much, just a slight curl, then straightening. The movement was subtle, barely perceptible, but I saw it. The paint rippled slightly, like water disturbed by a breath of wind, and her fingers moved. I should have run. Every instinct screamed at me to get out of that studio. But I was transfixed, frozen in place, watching as the woman in the painting slowly, incrementally, changed position. Over the course of 10 minutes, I timed it, her hand moved upward 3 inches, coming to rest with her palm open toward the viewer. Toward me. The smell hit me then. Not the familiar studio smells of linseed oil and turpentine, but something else. Old perfume, the scent of roses left too long in a vase. And underneath that, something musty and cold, like air from a sealed room that hasn't been opened in centuries. I grabbed my phone and photographed everything, hands shaking, then grabbed my bag and left. In my car, I sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes, trying to steady my breathing. Then I opened my laptop and reviewed the time-lapse images from the day. The painting had been moving constantly, not when we were looking directly at it. But in the 15-minute gaps between photographs, subtle changes occurred. The hand rising slowly, the expression shifting. And something else. Something I hadn't noticed in person. In each successive image, the background room became slightly clearer, the architectural details more defined. It was as if the depth of the painting was increasing, the space behind the woman expanding with each passing hour. I drove home and didn't sleep. Wednesday morning, I called Dr. Sarah Chen, a colleague at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. We'd gone through graduate school together, and she'd always been interested in the technical analysis of paintings, pigment composition, dating techniques, the science behind art. "Elena," she said, her voice warm. "It's been months. How are you?" "I need your expertise on something unusual," I said. "Can you come to Providence? Today, if possible." Something in my tone made her pause. "What kind of unusual?" "The kind I can't explain over the phone." She arrived at 3 p.m. I met her in the studio, where James had been maintaining our photographic documentation. The painting stood on its easel, the woman now clearly visible with her hand raised, palm outward. Sarah approached it with professional interest. Late 17th century, Dutch influence. Excellent preservation of the paint layer. Where did you say it came from? The Vale Estate in Newport. Sarah, I need you to look at these. I pulled up the sequence of photographs on my laptop. She studied them in silence, scrolling through days of images. I watched her expression shift from interest to confusion to disbelief. "This isn't possible," she said finally. "I know. Paintings don't do this, Elena. Paint is a stable medium. Once it dries, once it cures, it doesn't move. It doesn't change." "I know." She looked at the painting again, then back at the laptop. "You're documenting this every 15 minutes?" "Yes." "And there's no possibility of tampering? Someone altering the painting between shots?" "The studio is locked. I have the only key. We installed a motion sensor camera. No one has entered when we're not here." Sarah walked closer to the painting and pulled out a jeweler's loupe, examining the surface. After 5 minutes, she stepped back, her face pale. "The craquelure patterns are consistent throughout," she said slowly. "These cracks are centuries old. They flow naturally across the entire surface, including the areas that have supposedly changed. If someone were retouching this, adding fresh paint, we'd see it. Fresh paint doesn't crack like this." "Then what's happening?" She shook her head. "I don't know. This violates everything we understand about materials science, about chemistry, about reality." If you've ever worked in museums, hit subscribe. You know these institutions hold strange things, objects with histories that can't be fully explained. But this was beyond strange. This was impossible. That night, I found the diary hidden in the painting's frame and learned what Mercy Aldrich had become. Sarah stayed until 7 that evening, taking samples of the paint for analysis, microscopic scrapings from the edges that wouldn't damage the composition. She promised to rush the testing, to call me as soon as she had results. But I could see in her eyes that she didn't expect the science to explain this. After she left, James and I stood in the studio, looking at the painting. The time-lapse camera continued its work, clicking every 15 minutes. The woman watched us, her hand extended. "We should stop working on it," James said. "Just leave it alone. Tell Morrison we can't complete the restoration." "And if it keeps changing anyway?" He had no answer for that. That night, I decided to examine the painting's frame and stretcher bars more carefully. Sometimes important information, labels, stamps, written notes, can be found on the reverse of old paintings. I'd done a cursory check when the painting first arrived, but now I needed to look deeper. I carefully removed the painting from its frame, a relatively simple gilded wood affair that looked 19th century, not original to the piece. Behind it, the stretcher bars and canvas reverse were visible. The linen was dark with age, and someone had written on it in faded ink. I photographed it, then enhanced the image on my laptop to read the text. M.A. 1791. Forgive me what I have done. Let no light touch her after dark. M.A. Mercy Aldrich. Below that, in different handwriting, the 7th attempt. God help me, I have made her prison too well. J.A. J.A. Josiah Aldrich, her father. My hands were shaking as I searched the frame more carefully. Tucked into the back corner, protected by layers of old paper and fabric, I found a small, leather-bound journal, barely larger than my palm. The journal was in remarkably good condition, preserved by its hiding place. The pages were filled with dense handwriting, dated entries spanning from March 1791 to November 1791. Mercy Aldrich's diary. I read it there in the studio, standing under the fluorescent lights while James looked over my shoulder. This is what she wrote. March 14, 1791. Father has brought another painter to the house. This is the 7th he has commissioned. He says they never get it right, that they cannot capture what is needed. I do not understand his obsession with these portraits. Mother says I should not question him, but I am frightened. The other paintings are locked in the attic, and sometimes at night, I hear sounds from up there. April 3rd, 1791. The new painter is a strange man from Amsterdam. He speaks little English, but his eyes are knowing. Father spends hours with him, explaining something in low voices. Yesterday I heard Father say, "She must be contained completely. The paint must hold her." April 29, 1791. I posed for the painter today. 3 hours in that cold room. He stared at me with such intensity, and while he worked, he muttered words in Dutch that I could not understand. The candles burned strange colors, green and blue. When the session ended, I felt exhausted, drained. Mother says I look pale. June 12, 1791. Something is wrong. I feel strange, as if part of me is elsewhere. Last night I dreamed I was standing in a room, unable to move, unable to speak, while people walked past me. When I woke, Father was in my room, watching me sleep. "Forgive me," he whispered, "but you gave me no choice." What did I do to deserve this? August 8, 1791. I understand now. The painter comes no more. The portrait is finished, and I am becoming less. Each day I feel thinner, more transparent. My reflection in the mirror is fading. Father will not look at me. Mother weeps constantly. I tried to run yesterday, but I could not reach the door. Some force pulled me back toward Father's study where the painting sits. September 19, 1791. I am trapped. The painting is my prison. Father bound me with old magic, Dutch witchcraft the painter knew. He says I shamed the family, that I lay with a merchant sailor, that I am with child and unmarried. He could not bear the scandal, so he has made me disappear. Each day more of me goes into the painting. Soon there will be nothing left in this body but a shell. November 2nd, 1791. This is the last entry I can write. My hands are nearly transparent now. I can see through my own flesh. Tomorrow, Father says, the transference will be complete. I will exist only in the portrait. He says it is mercy, that I will live forever in the paint, that centuries from now I will still be young and beautiful. But it is not mercy. It is hell. I am aware, I am conscious, and I am alone in the painted darkness, screaming where no one can hear. Let no light touch the portrait after dark. That is when I am strongest. That is when I might be able to move. The journal ended there. James had gone pale. This is insane. Paint doesn't work this way. You can't trap someone in a painting. We're looking at a painting that moves, James. At this point, what can't we believe? I looked at the portrait, still sitting on its easel. The woman, Mercy, stared back. Her hand was extended, palm up, in what I now recognized as a plea. "She's been trapped in there for over 200 years, I whispered. Conscious, aware, alone. What do we do? I thought about the journal's warning. Let no light touch her after dark. I checked my watch. 8:45 p.m. The sun had set 2 hours ago. We cover the painting, I said. We keep it in complete darkness, and tomorrow we figure out how to help her. We draped a heavy black cloth over the painting, then wrapped it in additional layers of light-blocking material. The time-lapse camera I turned off. If light made her stronger, we needed to eliminate all of it. Before we left, James asked, How do you help someone trapped in a painting? I didn't have an answer. That night, I dreamed I was in a dark room with blue walls. A figure stood in the shadows, a young woman in 17th century dress. She moved toward me slowly, and I saw her face clearly for the first time. She looked like the portrait, but more alive, more real. Her expression was desperate. "Help me," she said. "Please, I've been alone so long." She reached out her hand, and I tried to take it. But as our fingers touched, I felt a pulling sensation, as if something were trying to drag me forward into the darkness with her. I woke up gasping, my bedroom cold despite the May warmth. Thursday morning, I returned to the museum to find the studio door open. James stood inside, staring at something on the floor. The black cloth we'd used to cover the painting lay in a heap. The painting itself stood uncovered on its easel. And Mercy Aldrich was no longer smiling. Her mouth was open, twisted in a silent scream. Both of her hands were extended forward, palms out, fingers spread wide. The background of the painting had changed completely. The blue room was clearly visible now, rendered in perfect detail. A room with no windows, no doors. A prison. On my work table, written in paint that was still wet, were 3 words. "Free me, tonight." I researched the witch-binding rituals all day, and by sunset, I knew what I had to do. But the cost would be higher than I'd imagined. James wanted to call Director Morrison, the police, someone in authority. But what would we tell them? A ghost wrote a message in paint? We had documentation, photographs, the time-lapse evidence, but would anyone believe it? Or would we simply lose access to the painting, our only chance to help Mercy? I sent James home. "This isn't your responsibility," I told him. "You have your whole career ahead of you. Walk away." "Dr. Marsh," "Walk away, James. Please." He left, reluctantly, and I locked the studio door behind him. I spent Thursday researching. The Aldrich Museum's library held archives on colonial history, including materials on folk magic practices of the period. I also called a professor at Brown University who specialized in early American occult traditions. I didn't tell him why I needed the information, just said it was for authentication of a painting's historical context. What I learned chilled me. Dutch binding rituals, imported to the colonies by settlers who remembered the old ways, could trap a person's consciousness in an object, usually a painting or mirror. The process required 7 elements. The subject's willing participation initially, their blood mixed with the paint, ritual words spoken during the painting's creation, specific pigments, including genuine lapis lazuli and iron gall ink, completion of the work during a waning moon, and most importantly, darkness. The bound person existed in a twilight state, more present when light was absent, able to affect the physical painting only after sunset. Breaking the binding required destroying the physical medium, burning the canvas, or dissolving it with specific chemicals. But there was a catch. If the bound person had been trapped for decades or centuries, their consciousness might be too integrated with the paint to survive the transition back to physical reality. They would simply cease to exist, the centuries finally catching up to them. Or there was another way. A transference. Someone had to willingly take their place. I sat in the library until it closed at 5 p.m., reading by the light of a desk lamp, understanding gradually what Mercy was asking of me. I returned to the studio at 7:30. The May sun was setting, the light through my window turning gold, then orange, then fading to purple. I uncovered the painting. Mercy looked different in the evening light. More solid somehow, more present. Her expression had changed again, no longer screaming, but watching me with an intensity that made my breath catch. Her hands remained extended, reaching out of the canvas. I pulled a chair close to the painting and sat down. "I know what happened to you," I said quietly. "I found your diary. I know your father trapped you because of the shame, because you were pregnant and unmarried. I'm so sorry, Mercy." The paint rippled. Her lips moved, and though no sound came, I could read the words. "Help me." "I know how to free you," I said. "But you need to understand what it means. If I destroy the painting, you'll cease to exist. 200 years will catch up to you at once. You'll die." The paint rippled again, more violently. Her head shook slightly. "No." "Or," I continued, my voice steady despite my racing heart, "someone can take your place. The binding can be transferred. You go free, and someone else goes into the painting." Her eyes widened. In the gathering darkness, they seemed to glow with their own light. "I'll do it," I said. "I'll take your place, but you have to tell me how." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then words began to appear on the canvas itself, written in that same wet paint. Blood on canvas. 7 words. Waning moon. Midnight. Willing trade. I checked the lunar calendar on my phone. Tonight was the first night of the waning moon. "What are the 7 words?" I asked. More letters formed. "I offer myself to take her place." And then what happens? Her consciousness leaves. Yours enters. The paint will hold you as it held me. For how long? Forever. I sat back in my chair. This is the moment I replay over and over in my mind. This is where I could have chosen differently. I could have walked away, let the museum deal with the painting, let Mercy remain trapped. It wasn't my responsibility. I had a life, a career, people who cared about me. But I kept thinking about her diary. 230 years trapped in darkness, conscious, aware, screaming where no one could hear. More than 2 centuries of solitary hell. I couldn't let it continue. "Okay," I said. "Tonight, midnight, I'll free you." The paint rippled with what looked like relief. I spent the hours before midnight preparing. I wrote letters to James, to my sister, to Director Morrison. I explained everything, attached all the documentation, all the photographs. I set them to send automatically if I didn't cancel the scheduled delivery by 8 a.m. Friday morning. If I went into the painting, at least someone would know the truth. At 11:45, I pricked my finger with an X-Acto knife and let 7 drops of blood fall onto the canvas. They were absorbed instantly, vanishing into the paint. The entire portrait shimmered, and Mercy's image became more solid, more real than ever before. At 11:55, I turned off all the lights except one candle. At midnight exactly, I placed my hand on the canvas and spoke the 7 words. "I offer myself to take her place." The paint was cold under my palm. Then it became soft, liquid, pulling at my skin. I felt a rushing sensation, like falling, and the studio seemed to tilt and spin. The last thing I saw clearly was Mercy's face in the painting, no longer desperate, but grateful. And then I was in the blue room. It's hard to describe what it's like to exist in a painting. You're conscious, fully aware, but you can't move unless you concentrate with every fiber of your being. The painted room is your entire world. You can see out into the real world, but it's like looking through thick glass. Sounds are muffled. Time moves strangely, sometimes fast, sometimes achingly slow. And you're so alone. I've been here for 6 months now. I saw James find the studio the next morning, saw him read my letters, saw his horror as he understood what I'd done. I watched as they held meetings, as art experts and scientists examined the painting. Sarah Chen came back, took more samples, ran more tests. They found my DNA in the paint now, mixed with Mercy's, mixed with pigments that are over 2 centuries old. Director Morrison wanted to destroy the painting. "It's cursed," he said. "We should burn it." But James convinced him to keep it, to preserve it. Dr. Marsh made a choice, he argued. We have to honor that. So the painting hangs in storage now, in a climate-controlled room, covered except when James visits. He comes twice a week, uncovers me, talks to me. He can't hear me respond, but sometimes I can make small movements, shift my expression slightly, and I think he understands. He's researching the binding ritual, looking for a way to break it without destroying my consciousness. But I know the truth. There is no way out. This is my existence now, forever young, forever trapped, forever alone in the painted darkness. But Mercy is free. That's what I tell myself during the long hours when no one visits, when I'm covered in darkness, when the weight of eternity presses down. She's free. She walked out of the studio that night, and though James said she vanished before reaching the street, her body dissolving like morning mist, the centuries finally claiming her, she had those few minutes of freedom. She felt the night air, saw the stars, existed in the real world one last time. It was worth it, wasn't it? If you're from New England, if you ever visit the Aldrich Museum of Colonial Art in Providence, know that the painting in storage is more than just pigment and canvas. Someone is in there. Someone is aware. And if you're a conservator, if you work with old paintings, be careful. Some portraits are more than they seem. Before you close this video, hit subscribe if you believe in the unexplainable. Comment if you've ever felt watched by a painting. And if you're ever offered the chance to sacrifice yourself for someone else's freedom, think carefully. The cost might be higher than you can imagine. My name is Dr. Elena Marsh. I was a fine art conservator. Now I'm a painting, and I'll be here forever, watching the world through layers of varnish and oil, a consciousness trapped in pigment, wondering if I made the right choice. The painting hangs in the dark most days, but sometimes, late at night, I can feel someone looking at me. And I wonder if it's another person, bound in another painting somewhere, reaching out across the darkness, as alone as I am. There are more of us than you think. Be careful which paintings you look at too long. Sometimes, they're looking back.